Throughout this world-building catalog, we have talked about one planet. Understandably so, it's the main focus of the series. But I've seen a lot of demand for discussion on the other planets in the Romulus system. Pallas, Caelius, Quill, Viminale, Quiri, and Aventine, and I guess the Leprechaun too. Everything I needed to say about these planets are in these videos, but I could see where y'all are coming from. I did make these planets interesting after all, so since we took a tour of Capitoline's future last episode, we'll use this video to go back to the past, when I first started working with these planets. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the concepts and ideas I had for these planets that never fully went through, and I'm probably never going to visit these ideas again, so if you yourself are a world builder and you want some ideas, feel free to take these. I made the move to work with the TRAPPIST-1 system way before we got any data on the planets, so I think I started working on Pallas when we had extremely low density values for Planet B, which meant that Planet B was made up of a lot of volatiles like water, despite it being ridiculously close to Romulus. So I envisioned Pallas as a world covered in a supercritical ocean of water. Supercritical water forms in a state where it's too hot to condense into a liquid, but the air pressures are so high that it can't vaporize into a gas. So, early versions of Pallas were super wet, super extreme, hyper Venus. Temperatures would be high enough to melt the surface even without the tidal heating. And I didn't really think about Pallas for that long after that. And I didn't need to. After the Webb telescope confirmed that Planet B had no atmosphere at all, Pallas became a barren super Io, dotted with yellow sulfur deposits and shrouded in volcanic plumes, which would quickly be blown away by Romulus' stellar wind. And this is where my second scrapped idea for Pallas comes in. Because after all those volcanic gases were stripped away from Pallas, they'd end up in orbit around Romulus, creating a radiation belt. Some of this material would end up in interplanetary space, and since these planets are so close to each other, that brings us to Caelius. Early versions of Caelius were again before any James Webb observations, and at the time, the most likely outcome for Planet C was a Venus clone. But you know, that's boring. I could do more than that. Let's pull up the phases of water again. If we graph a point where Venus is, it's obviously not in a spot where liquid water can exist on its surface, but it's very close. You can imagine a planet where, if we just turn down its temperature a bunch and lower its air pressure, it would still kind of be a Venus clone, but liquid water would be able to exist there. And that planet was my vision for Caelius. A planet with a couple atmospheres worth of air pressure, and a temperature that's still quite high, but not above the boiling point of water. Most of the planet would still be a desert though. It's still so hot that any liquid water would be constrained to the polar regions. Now here is where I got to play with tides. The gravity of Romulus and the other planets would be pulling on Caelius' oceans, meaning that while the seas themselves are comparatively small, the tide pools would span thousands of kilometers inland. Mid to high latitude regions would stay partly dry, but once the tide comes in, they would be flooded. And those mid to high latitude regions, they're warmer. They cannot support liquid water. So every now and then in this region, you'd get a biblical flood of steam and boiling hot water. Then the James Webb came around and ruined the fun, so Caelius is now a boring rock. Yeah, but here is where Pallas' radiation belt comes in. This shell of interplanetary material around Planet B's orbit is made of volcanic products like sulfur compounds. Again, since the planets are so close, some of these sulfur compounds are going to come back down on Caelius, covering the planet in a thin layer of sulfur compounds. Here's the fun part. While liquid water obviously can't exist on Planet C anymore, James Webb observations of Planet C's temperature revealed that this planet is the perfect temperature for sulfur to condense into a solid. More specifically, in a solid state known as monoclinic sulfur, sort of spindly and spiky. Any sulfur that escaped from Pallas would fall onto Caelius and come back down as sulfur snow. Unfortunately, this is a scrapped idea because I don't know how likely this scenario is. It all depends on how dense the material in Planet B's orbit is, and let alone how much of that makes it to Planet C. I haven't found any research on this, because I haven't looked, but I really like this idea, so it's up in the air at this point. Don't take it. It's still mine. You don't know what I'm gonna do with this. But for now, let's move on to Quill. I know I hinted about me talking more about Quill in the future, but again, all I have for Quill is all in this video. I straight up just not have had the time to even brainstorm about this planet. Most of my brain power went to thinking about what the hell this place could even be. Again, my confusion on this place is all in that video, but in summation, Planet D, in my eyes at least, was right in the middle of big enough to retain an atmosphere and small enough to lose it. And to top it all off, it had a low density, which implies a large amount of volatiles like water. But TRAPPIST-1 is a very active red dwarf star, so I lean more towards it not having an atmosphere, but I kept it interesting in the first versions of this planet. My first version of Quill was, yeah, a barren rock, but with a thick enough atmosphere to hold on to liquid water. But just barely. Obviously, water on the night side of this planet would be frozen, but due to the low air pressure, water on most of the day side of the planet would boil away. Liquid water would only be stable on a thin band on the day side of Quill, pretty much like a conventional vision of a tidally locked planet. But what's significant about early Quill was that, from space, Quill had no visible bodies of water. All liquid water in this narrow band would be confined to, at most, small lakes and ponds. What was also cool about these pools is that the boiling point of water on early Quill was lower than human body temperature, meaning that if you were to step into a pool, preferably with a suit on, the water would boil around you. But for some reason, I decided to scrap this idea. I think it was a dream I had, but at one point, Quill became the fog world. Yeah, fuck yeah, fog world. I guess my reasoning was that, yeah, its low density indicated a large amount of water, but the possibility of it having a thin atmosphere meant that that water couldn't have been in a liquid form. So, fog and ice. I think I even had some early spec bio on this version of Quill. I imagined like giant, wide, leaf-like plants that were able to capture the fog and use it as water, sort of like the wind catchers on Dune. But at this point, Planet D still could have been anything, so I had a bunch of other concepts for Quill. One concept being a basic water world. One of them is more Earth-like with both land and ocean. And I think I read a paper somewhere that suggested that Planet D was also a Venusian-type planet, so I have one of those on standby. And then once data for planets B and C came in, I was really concerned that Planet D would have been a barren rock too, so I whipped up a concept for Planet D being a barren rock. And all the other planets as well. But yeah, again, if you're curious about what I did with Planet D after the James Webb data came in, feel free to check out this video, but now's a good time to move on to the host of the show. So this whole world building project of mine started way before the discovery of the TRAPPIST-1 system, so what was it originally? So we're back on this website again, the place with the pretty worlds, the pretty lists, yeah. But we're not going to be looking at this, we're going to be looking at this. It's their article on like a thermoplanetary habitability classification for exoplanets. Big words, super old article, but let's just scroll down. There it is. Basically, they devised a system of like classification of habitable exoplanets based on their temperatures. So here it is. It's split into 50-degree chunks. And yeah, my first world building project was having a planet in each of these temperature classes. Pretty much an ice world, a Mars-like world, an Earth-like world, a hot desert world, and I think a supercritical ocean type of deal around here. And obviously the first version of quote-unquote Capitoline was this guy, the middle guy, the Earth-like exoplanet. This concept was so old, in fact, that all I have of it is this. A photo of the planet generated in Space Engine that I used as my profile picture for a 10-year-old forum that shut down last year. And it's hard to tell in the low-resolution photo, but you can kinda see the continent of Ophelia. And that's kinda why all the continents are laid out the way they are. Our central continent, Ophelia, is based on a procedurally generated map. But once the discovery of TRAPPIST-1 was announced in 2017, I made the big and bold move, at the time, to change my setting to that. Two reasons why. One, the TRAPPIST-1 system is in the constellation Aquarius, which is my zodiac sign. And the somewhat related reason number two, the 7 planets were discovered in February of 2017, my birth month. And thus a rather big change was made. What was once a lush forest became a cold, tidally locked planet. And again, I don't really have much of this planet before 2023, so I'll just pop up some old maps of that. And of course I made some changes from the procedurally generated stuff. I moved some continents around, got rid of some. And oh yeah, the ice sheet also changed a lot too. I wildly overestimated the strength of that equatorial warm current, so there was an equatorial ocean surrounding the entire planet at one point. And then I requested someone to spit the map through EPS, and that equatorial ocean disappeared, understandably. And of course I had to retrofit some shoddy plate tectonics in order to get the mountains somewhat accurate, but I wasn't entirely pleased with that. So eventually, I did a proper G-Plates run, and I made a proper map. And yeah, honestly, I thought I had more to talk about with Capitoline, or past Capitoline. But honestly, this world is still going to change. I'm still building it. That's the point of this whole YouTube channel after all. So, if you're curious about what I'm gonna do next with this place, go ahead and subscribe. I'm sure you don't want to lose this channel, right? Yeah, okay, whatever. Planet F now. Looking back now, I kept pretty faithful to the NASA artist renditions of these planets. A good example of this is early Viminale, which was an eyeball planet. But either I figured that'd be too boring, or once planet B and C data came in, it started slowly dawning on me that a lot of these planets wouldn't have atmospheres. So that idea got shelved very quickly. So I started looking towards the outer moons of our solar system. And thus, early versions of Viminale were inspired by one of Saturn's moons. This is Iapetus. This is also Iapetus. Iapetus is known for a lot of weird things, but the weirdest thing is its two-tone coloration. The darker regions are made of organic carbonaceous materials, and the lighter regions are, if I had to guess, some fresher ice. It's comparable to Europa. The leading theory for the formation of this dark spot, known as Cassini Regio, is that since this dark spot is, well, darker, it absorbs more sunlight, causing the ice below it to sublimate a little. This sublimated ice will deposit at colder, brighter regions. Over time, as more ice in the Cassini Regio sublimates and deposits at other regions, the carbonaceous material left behind will get more and more concentrated, further darkening Cassini Regio, and as ice deposits on other regions, brightening the rest of the moon, leading to the stark contrast we see today. We're not entirely sure where this dark spot originated from in the first place, but I decided to take what we know about Iapetus and just copy-paste it onto Viminale. Old Viminale had its day side completely covered in a dark spot, made of the same stuff as Iapetus' spot, and a night side completely covered in fresh ice and snow. Here's the thing though, Viminale is a lot warmer than Iapetus, meaning that instead of ice sublimating from the extra heat absorbed by the hydrocarbons, ice near the substellar point on Viminale would melt into a dark, slushy sea. Iapetus also has an equatorial mountain range, possibly from extra debris during its formation, and I had something similar on Viminale as well, but instead of an equatorial mountain range, the equator instead would have a line of craters on its surface. These impact craters would have been caused from asteroids, which also would have delivered the hydrocarbon materials that made Viminale's dayside so dark. So yeah, fun story, but I think the Viminale that we have today, with the ever-changing dunes of water, ice, and carbon dioxide, make for a much more dynamic environment, even if it isn't as conducive to life. But speaking of downgrades, let's go to Planet G. Quiri went through a lot of phases in its early history. It's projected to be a water world, but it's also one of the biggest planets in the system. And since it's further away from Romulus, the strength of flares and UV radiation is a lot weaker out here, meaning that Quiri could have a potential atmosphere thick enough to host liquid water on its surface. So my first version of Quiri was exactly that, a cold world with deep salty oceans. It's still cold, meaning that ice would still exist on the day side of the planet, but because of how ocean currents move on a tidally locked planet, these icebergs would swirl around the day side of the planet and condense into large ice continents, twisting as the ocean currents move around it, and the coastline constantly changing as warm water melts the coastal icebergs. But I don't think this lasted too long because at the time, I found something a lot more visually appealing. And for this, we're gonna need another phase diagram, but instead of water or sulfur, carbon dioxide. Under a dense enough atmosphere, carbon dioxide can form into a liquid. And what do you think I did with that information? This next version of Quiri had deep carbon dioxide oceans, all shrouded in a freezing atmosphere at least several times more dense than Earth's atmosphere. Near the poles and on the night side, it would be cold enough for hydrocarbon clouds to form, similar to those on Titan. And just look at that, man. Around this time, I also experimented with other molecules that could lead to this appearance. So I also landed on ammonia oceans. Well, not pure liquid ammonia, but rather an ammonia solution. If TRAPPIST-1G had oceans of an aqueous solution of 32% ammonia, that would bring the freezing point down to -95°C. This would also result in a global ocean and cloud formation at the poles and the dark side, and yada yada yada. Only difference is, all of this would be possible at lower atmospheric pressures compared to the liquid carbon dioxide world. And that I was a lot more comfortable with. But I don't know, as pretty as this planet was, it kinda stuck out like a sore thumb. And I didn't really want to detract from Capitoline, so I scrapped this. And I went back to the outer moons of our solar system. Although not by much, TRAPPIST-1G is the largest planet in the system, Its larger mass, combined with its proximity to its neighbors, should mean that TRAPPIST-1G is experiencing a lot of tidal forces. Like Triton. Okay, the reason for Triton's cryovolcanism is a lot different than Isle's volcanism, but this is closer to what I'm envisioning for this version of Planet G. This version of Quiri would have cryovolcanic lakes and seas, kinda like Pallas but icy, or future Capitoline but bigger. Only difference here is that Quiri would have a lot more tidal heating, enough to generate a hyper-dense atmosphere of water vapor and volcanic gases. The Wikipedia article for TRAPPIST-1G suggests that it would have a very dense atmosphere of either abiotic oxygen or a lot of steam, with a density comparable to at least that of Venus. This would give it a very strong greenhouse effect and turn it into a global ocean world. If I only wanted liquid water at cryovolcanic sites, I would have to bring the air pressure down to like around 10 atmospheres worth, at most. But I guess to me, this version of Quiri was a bit too extreme, so I eventually settled on an Enceladus clone with surface geysers. Yeah, again, TRAPPIST-1G could be any of these types of worlds or something completely different that I haven't thought of, and we'll see if I'm ever right once James Webb observations come through, but let's move on to our final planet. So it looks like TRAPPIST-1H is the runt of the litter. It's heavily understudied, at least compared to the other guys. And it's also not that interesting compared to the other planets as well. It's small and cold. Therefore, I didn't think too much about this place either. I think I had a concept for Aventine that was a Titan clone, but that was before I found out that Titan-like atmospheres weren't stable around red dwarfs, so I guess that quickly got scrapped. So, barren ice world it is. All the other concepts I had for Aventine were just different colors, and I eventually chose the red boy, something like Sedna, which is something that I rarely see in world-building sci-fi stuff, despite how common this color is in our solar system's objects. And yeah, that's it for Aventine. So I'm just gonna drop some lore. So here's the day side of Aventine, all pretty and stuff, right? Here is the night side of Aventine. And yeah, those were all the ideas I had for this system. A lot of changes, yeah, and I think there will be a lot more changes in the future. A little birdie told me that we're getting more data from the TRAPPIST-1 planets this year. So if you want to hear first minute coverage on that, and if you're curious to see how I'm gonna world build with those future papers, feel free to subscribe, stick around. Also, join the Discord, it's in the description. I leak a bunch of sneak peeks of future videos in there, so yeah, join that. Alright, bye.